The Ignorant Schoolmaster 5 Lessons in Intellectual Emancipation. Chapter 2 The Ignorant One's Lesson. Page 19 Let's go ashore, then, with Telemachus onto Calypso's island. Let's make our way with one of the visitors into the madman's lair, into Miss Marcelise's institution in Louvain, into the home of Mr. Descovifellera, a tanner transformed by Jacoto into a Latinist, into the École Normale Militaire in Louvain, where the philosopher Prince Frederick of Orange had put the founder of universal teaching in charge of educating future military instructors. Imagine recruits sitting on benches, murmuring in unison, Calypso, Calypso could not, etc., etc. 2 months later they knew how to read, write, and count. During this primary education, the one was taught English, the other German, this one fortification, that one chemistry, etc., etc. Did the founder know all these things? Not at all, but we explained them to him, and I can assure you he profited greatly from the École Normale. But I'm confused. Did you all, then, know chemistry? No, but we learned it, and we gave him lessons in it. That's universal teaching. It's the disciple that makes the master one. There is an order in madness, as in everything. Let's begin, then, at the beginning, Telemaque. Everything is in everything, says the madman. And his critics add, and everything is in Telemaque. Because Telemaque was apparently the book that could do anything. Page 20 Does the student want to learn how to read? Does he want to learn English or German, the art of litigation or of combat? The madman, imperturbably, will put a copy of Telemaque in his hands and the student will begin to repeat, Calypso, Calypso could not, and so on, until he knows the prescribed number of volumes of Telemaque and can recount them. He must be able to talk about everything he learns: the form of the letters, the placement or endings of words, the images, the reasoning, the characters' feelings, the moral lessons, to say what he sees, what he thinks about it, what he makes of it. There was only one rule: he must be able to show, in the book, the materiality of everything he says. He will be asked to write compositions and perform improvisations under the same conditions. He must use the words and turns of phrase in the book to construct his sentences. He must show, in the book, the facts on which his reasoning is based. In short, the master must be able to verify in the book the materiality of everything the student says. The island of the book. The book. Telemaque or another one. Chance placed Telemaque at Jacoto's disposal, convenience told him to keep it. Telemaque has been translated into many languages and is easily available in bookstores. It isn't the greatest masterpiece of the French language, but the style is pure, the vocabulary varied, and the moral severe. In it one learns mythology and geography. And behind the French translation, one can hear the echo of Virgil's Latin and Homer's Greek. In short, it's a classic, one of those books in which a language presents the essential of its forms and its powers. A book that is a totality, a center to which one can attach everything new one learns, a circle in which one can understand each of these new things, find the ways to say what one sees in it, what one thinks about it, what one makes of it. This is the first principle of universal teaching: one must learn something and relate everything else to it. Page 21 And first something must be learned. Would La Pallas say as much? La Pallas maybe, but the old master would say, such and such a thing must be learned, and then this other thing, and after that, this other. Selection, progression, incompletion, these are his principles. We learn rules and elements, then apply them to some chosen reading passages, and then do some exercises based on the acquired rudiments. Then we graduate to a higher level, other rudiments, another book, other exercises, another professor. At each stage the abyss of ignorance is dug again, the professor fills it in before digging another. Fragments add up, detached pieces of an explicator's knowledge that put the student on a trail, following a master with whom he will never catch up. The book is never whole, the lesson is never finished. The master always keeps a piece of learning, that is to say, a piece of the student's ignorance up his sleeve. I understood that, says the satisfied student. You think so, corrects the master. In fact, there's a difficulty here that I've been sparing you until now. We will explain it when we get to the corresponding lesson. What does this mean? Asks the curious student. I could tell you, responds the master, but it would be premature, you wouldn't understand at all. It will be explained to you next year. The master is always a length ahead of the student, who always feels that in order to go farther he must have another master, supplementary explications. Thus does the triumphant Achilles drag Hector's corpse, attached to his chariot, around the city of Troy. Reasoned progression of knowledge is an indefinitely reproduced mutilation. Any man who is taught is only half a man too. Don't ask if the little educated child suffers from this mutilation. The system's genius is to transform loss into profit. The child advances. He has been taught, therefore he has learned, therefore he can forget. Behind him the abyss of ignorance is being dug again. But here's the amazing part, from now on the ignorance is someone else's. Page 22. What he has forgotten, he has surpassed. He no longer has to spell out loud or stumble his way through a lesson like those vulgar intelligences and the children in beginning classes. People aren't parrots in his school. We don't load the memory, we form the intelligence. I understood, says the child, I am not a parrot. The more he forgets, the more evident it is to him that he understands. The more intelligent he becomes, the more he can peer down from on high at those he has surpassed, those who remain in the antechamber of learning, in front of the mute book, those who repeat, because they are not intelligent enough to understand. This is the genius of the explicators, they attach the creature they have rendered inferior with the strongest chains in the land of stultification, the child's consciousness of his own superiority. This consciousness, moreover, doesn't kill off good feelings. The little educated child will perhaps be moved by the ignorance of the common people and will want to work at instructing them. He will know it is difficult to deal with minds hardened by routine or befuddled by unmethodicalness. But if he is devoted, he will know that there is a kind of explication adapted to each category in the hierarchy of intelligence, he will come down to their level. But now here is another story. The madman, the founder, as his followers called him, comes on stage with his Telemaque, a book, a thing. Take it and read it, he says to the poor person. I don't know how to read, answers the poor person. How would I understand what is written in the book? As you have understood all things up until now, by comparing two facts. Here is a fact that I will tell you, the first sentence of the book, Calypso could not be consoled after the departure of Ulysses. Repeat, Calypso, Calypso could. Now, here is a second fact, the words are written there. Don't you recognize anything? The first word I said to you was Calypso, wouldn't that also be the first word on the page? Look at it closely, until you are sure of always recognizing it in the middle of a crowd of other words. Page 23. In order to do this you must tell me everything you see there. There are signs that a hand traced on paper, signs whose type was assembled by a hand at the printers. Tell me the story of the adventures, that is, the comings and goings, the detours, in a word, the trajectory of the pen that wrote this word on paper or of the engraving tool that engraved it onto the copper. 3. Would you know how to recognize the letter O that one of my students, a locksmith by profession, calls the round, the letter L that he calls the square? Tell me the form of each letter as you would describe the form of an object or of an unknown place. Don't say that you can't. You know how to see, how to speak, you know how to show, you can remember. What more is needed? An absolute attention for seeing and seeing again, saying and repeating. Don't try to fool me or fool yourself. Is that really what you saw? What do you think about it? Aren't you a thinking being? Or do you think you are all body? The founders Gnarl changed all that. You have a soul like me. For there will be time afterward to talk about what the book talks about. What do you think of Calypso, of sadness, of a goddess, of an eternal spring? Show me what makes you say what you say. The book prevents escape. The route the student will take is unknown. But we know what he cannot escape, the exercise of his liberty. We know too that the master won't have the right to stand anywhere else, only at the door. The student must see everything for himself, compare, and always respond to a three-part question: what do you see? What do you think about it? What do you make of it? And so on, to infinity. But that infinity is no longer the master's secret, it is the student's journey. The book is finished. It is a totality that the student holds in his hand, that he can span entirely with a glance. There is nothing the master can hide from him, and nothing he can hide from the master's gaze. The circle forbids cheating, and above all, that great cheat, incapacity. I can't, I don't understand. There is nothing to understand. Everything is in the book. One has only to recount it, the form of each sign, the adventures. Page 24 of each sentence, the lesson of each volume. One must begin to speak. Don't say that you can't. You know how to say I can't. Say in its place Calypso could not, and you're off. You're off on a route that you already knew, and that you should follow always without giving up. Don't say, I can't. Or then, learn to say it in the manner of Calypso, in the manner of Telemachus, of Narbel, of Idomeneus. The other circle has begun, the circle of power. You will never run out of ways to say I can't, and soon you will able to say everything. A voyage in a circle. It's understood that the adventures of Ulysses' son form the manual, and Calypso the first word. Calypso, the hidden one. But precisely what must be discovered is that there is nothing hidden, no words underneath words, no language that tells the truth of language. Signs and still more signs are learned, sentences and still more sentences. Ready-made sentences are repeated. Entire books are learned by heart. And the old master becomes indignant, so this is what learning something means for you. First, your children repeat like parrots. They cultivate only one faculty, memory, while we exercise intelligence, taste, and imagination. Your children learn by heart. That's your first mistake. And this is your second: your children don't learn by heart. You say that they do, but that's impossible. Human brains in general, and those of children in particular, are incapable of such an effort of memory. A circular argument. The discourse of one circle to another. The propositions must be overturned. The old master says that a child's memory is incapable of such efforts because powerlessness, in general, is its slogan. It says that memory is something other than intelligence or imagination, and, in so doing, it uses an ordinary weapon against those that want to prevail over powerlessness, division. It believes memory to be weak because it doesn't believe in the power of human intelligence. It believes it inferior because it believes in inferiors and superiors. In the end, its double argument amounts to this: there are inferiors and superiors, inferiors can't do what superiors can. Page 25. The old master knows only this. It depends on inequality, but not the inequality that acknowledges the prince's decree, the inequality that goes without saying, that is in all heads and in all sentences. For that, it has its gentle weapon, difference. This is not that, this is far from that, one cannot compare. Memory is not intelligence, to repeat is not to know, comparison isn't reason, there is the ground and the background. Any flour can be ground up in the mill of distinction. And the argument can thus be modernized and extended to the scientific as well as to the humanitarian. There are stages in the development of intelligence. A child's intelligence is not an adult's. A child's intelligence should not be overburdened. One runs the risk of injuring his health, his faculties. The old master demands only that he be granted his negations and his differences. This is not that, this is something different, this is more, this is less. And this is enough to exalt all the thrones of the hierarchy of intelligence. Calypso and the locksmith. Let the old master have his say. Let's look at the facts. There is a will that commands and an intelligence that obeys. Let's call the act that makes an intelligence proceed under the absolute constraint of a will attention. It makes no difference whether the act is directed at the form of a letter to be recognized, a sentence to be memorized, a relation to be found between two mathematical entities, or the elements of a speech to be composed. There is not one faculty that records, another that understands, another that judges. The locksmith who calls the letter O the round, and L the square is already thinking about relations. And inventing is not of another order than remembering. Let the explicators form the children's taste and imagination, let them expound on the genius of creators. We will be content to do as creators do, like Racine, who memorized, translated, repeated, and imitated Euripides, Bossuet, who did the same with Tertullian, Rousseau with Amyot, Boileau with Horace and Juvenal, like Demosthenes, who copied. Page 26. Thucydides 8 times, Hooft, who read Tacitus 52 times, Seneca, who recommended that the same book be read and reread, Haydn, who recreated 6 of Bach's sonatas over and over, Michelangelo, who spent his time redoing the same torso again and again. 5 Power cannot be divided up. There is only one power, that of saying and speaking, of paying attention to what one sees and says. One learns sentences and more sentences, one discovers facts, that is, relations between things, and still other relations that are all of the same nature. One learns to combine letters, words, sentences, ideas. It will not be said that one has acquired science, that one knows truth or has become a genius. But it will be known that, in the intellectual order, one can do what any man can do. This is what everything is in everything means, the tautology of power. All the power of language is in the totality of a book. All knowledge of oneself as an intelligence is in the mastery of a book, a chapter, a sentence, a word. Everything is in everything and everything is in Telemaque, scoff the critics, and, to catch the disciples off guard, they ask, is everything also in the first volume of Telemaque? And in its first word? Is mathematics in Telemaque? And in the first word of Telemaque? And the disciple feels the ground slip out from under him and calls on the master for help. What should he answer? You should have answered that you believe all human works to be in the word calypso, since this word is a work of human intelligence. He who calculated fractions is the same intellectual being as he who made the word calypso. The artist knew Greek, he chose a word that meant crafty, hidden. The artist resembles the one who imagined the ways of writing the word we're talking about. He resembles the one who made the paper on which we write, the one who uses pens to the same purpose, the one who sharpens the pens with a penknife, the one who made the penknife out of iron, the one who procured the iron, the one who made the ink, the one who printed the word calypso, the one who made the printing machine, the one who generalized the explications, the one who made the printing ink, etc., etc., etc. All sciences, all art, anatomy, dynamics, and so on, are the fruits of the same intelligence who made the word calypso. Page 27. A philosopher arriving in an unknown land would know it was inhabited when he saw a geometrical figure in the sand. These are human footprints, he says. His companions believe him mad because the lines he shows them don't look like a footprint. The scholars of the perfected 19th century open their startled eyes wide when someone points a finger at the word calypso and tells them, a human hand is there. I bet that the man sent from the École Normale in France, looking at the word calypso, would say, that doesn't have the shape of a hand. Everything is in everything. 6. Here is everything that is in calypso, the power of intelligence that is in any human manifestation. The same intelligence makes nouns and mathematical signs. What's more, it also makes signs and reasonings. There aren't two sorts of minds. There is inequality in the manifestations of intelligence, according to the greater or lesser energy communicated to the intelligence by the will for discovering and combining new relations, but there is no hierarchy of intellectual capacity. Emancipation is becoming conscious of this equality of nature. This is what opens the way to all adventure in the land of knowledge. It is a matter of daring to be adventurous, and not whether one learns more or less well or more or less quickly. The Jacoto method is not better, it is different. That's why the procedures used matter very little in themselves. It could be Telemaque, or it could be something else. One begins with the text and not with grammar, with entire words and not with syllables. It is not that it is absolutely necessary to learn this way to learn better, and that the Jacoto method is the forefather of the global method. In fact, it's much faster to start with Calypso and not with the ABCS. But the speed one is only an effect of power gained, a consequence of the emancipatory principle. The old master begins with letters because he directs students according to the principle of intellectual inequality, and especially the intellectual inferiority of children. He believes that letters are easier to distinguish than words. This is wrong, but this is what he thinks. He believes that a child's intelligence is only able to learn CAC and that an adult, that is to say a superior, intelligence is necessary to learn Calypso. 7 page 28. In short, BAB like Calypso, is a flag, inability versus ability. Spelling is an act of contrition before being a way of learning. That's why one could change the order of the procedures without changing anything in the principles. The old master might one day take it into his head to train to read by words, and only then, maybe, would we have our students learn how to spell them. And what would result from this apparent change of posture? Nothing. Our students would be no less emancipated and the children of the old master no less stultified. The old master doesn't stultify his students by making them spell, he stultifies by telling them that they can't spell by themselves. Making them read by words won't emancipate them, it will deaden them, because he will be very careful to tell them that their young intelligence can't do without the explications he pulls out of his aged brain. It is thus not the procedure, the course, the manner, that emancipates or stultifies, it's the principle. The principle of inequality, the old principle, stultifies no matter what one does. The principle of equality, the Jacoto principle, emancipates no matter what procedure, book, or fact it is applied to. Point 8. The problem is to reveal an intelligence to itself. Anything can be used. Telemaque. Or a prayer or a song that the child or the ignorant one knows by heart. There is always something the ignorant one knows that can be used as a point of comparison, something to which a new thing to be learned can be related. The locksmith who opens his eyes wide when told he can read bears witness to this. He doesn't even know the alphabet. Let him take the time to glance at the calendar. Doesn't he know the order of the months, and can't he thus figure out January, February, March? He knows how to count a little. And what's to prevent him from counting softly while following the lines in order to recognize in written form what he already knows? He knows he is called William and that his birthday is January 16th. He will soon know how to find the word. He knows that February has only 28 days. He sees that one column is shorter than the others and he will recognize 28. And so on. There is always something that the master can ask him to find, something about which he can question him and thus verify the work of his intelligence. Page 29. The Master and Socrates. These are in fact the master's two fundamental acts. He interrogates, he demands speech, that is to say, the manifestation of an intelligence that wasn't aware of itself or that had given up. And he verifies that the work of the intelligence is done with attention, that the words don't say just anything in order to escape from the constraint. Is a highly skilled, very learned master necessary to perform this? On the contrary, the learned master's science makes it very difficult for him not to spoil the method. He knows the response, and his questions lead the student to it naturally. This is the secret of good masters. Through their questions, they discreetly guide the student's intelligence discreetly enough to make it work, but not to the point of leaving it to itself. There is a Socrates sleeping in every explicator. And it must be very clear how the Jacato method, that is to say, the student's method, differs radically from the method of the Socratic master. Through his interrogations, Socrates leads Meno's slave to recognize the mathematical truths that lie within himself. This may be the path to learning, but it is in no way a path to emancipation. On the contrary, Socrates must take the slave by his hand so that the latter can find what is inside himself. The demonstration of his knowledge is just as much the demonstration of his powerlessness. He will never walk by himself, unless it is to illustrate the master's lesson. In this case, Socrates interrogates a slave who is destined to remain one. The Socratic method is thus a perfected form of stultification. Like all learned masters, Socrates interrogates in order to instruct. But whoever wishes to emancipate someone must interrogate him in the manner of men and not in the manner of scholars, in order to be instructed, not to instruct. And that can only be performed by someone who effectively knows no more than the student, who has never made the voyage before him, the ignorant master. Page 30. There's no risk of this master sparing the child the time necessary to account for the word calypso. But what does he have to do with calypso, and how would he even understand anything about it? Let's forget calypso for a moment. Who is the child who hasn't heard the Lord's Prayer, who hasn't learned the words by heart? In this way the thing is found, and the poor and ignorant father who wants to teach his son to read will not be embarrassed. He will certainly find some obliging person in the neighborhood, someone literate enough to copy the prayer for him. With this, the father or the mother can begin the child's instruction by asking him where the word are is. If the child is attentive, he will say that the first word on the paper must be are, since it is the first word in the sentence. Father will necessarily be the second word. The child will be able to compare, distinguish, know these two words and recognize them everywhere. 9. Who is the father or mother who would not know how to ask the child, struggling with the text of the prayer, what he sees, what he makes of it or what he can say about it, and what he thinks about what he's saying or doing? It's the same way he would ask a neighbor about the tool he holds in his hand and how it is used. To teach what one doesn't know is simply to ask questions about what one doesn't know. Science isn't needed to ask such questions. The ignorant one can ask anything, and for the voyager in the land of signs, his questions alone will be true questions compelling the autonomous exercise of his intelligence. Granted, replies the critic. But that which makes the interrogator forceful also makes him incompetent as a verifier. How will he know if the child is losing his way? The father or mother can always ask the child, "Show me Father or heaven." But how can they verify if the child has pointed to the right word? The difficulty can only get worse as the child advances, if he advances in his training. Won't the ignorant master and the ignorant student be playing out the fable of the blind man leading the blind? Page 31. The power of the ignorant. Let's begin by reassuring the critics. We will not make of the ignorant one the fount of an innate science, and especially not of a science of the people as opposed to that of the scholar. One must be learned to judge the results of the work, to verify the student's science. The ignorant one himself will do less and more at the same time. He will not verify what the student has found, he will verify that the student has searched. He will judge whether or not he has paid attention. For one need only be human to judge the fact of work. Just like the philosopher who recognizes human footprints in the lines in the sand, the mother knows how to see in his eyes, in the child's features, when he is doing work, when he is pointing to the words in a sentence, if he is attentive to what he is doing. 10. The ignorant master must demand from his student that he prove to him that he has studied attentively. Is this insignificant? Think about everything the demand implies for the student in the way of an endless task. Think about the intelligence it can also grant to the ignorant examiner. What prevents the ignorant but emancipated mother from noticing all the times that she asks the child where Father is, whether or not he always points to the same word? What prevents her hiding the word and asking, "What is the word under my finger?" etc., etc. 11. A pious image, a housewife's recipe. This is how the official spokesman of the explicative tribe judged it: one can teach what one doesn't know is still a housewife's motto. 12. We will argue that maternal intuition does not exert any domestic privilege here. The finger that hides the word father is the same that is in Calypso, the hidden or the crafty, the mark of human intelligence, the most elementary ruse of its reason, the true reason, the one proper to each and common to all, this reason that is manifested in an exemplary fashion whenever the ignorant one's knowledge and the master's ignorance, by becoming equal, demonstrate the powers of intellectual equality. Page 32. Man is an animal who can tell very well when a speaker doesn't know what he's talking about. That ability is what unites us as humans. 13. The practice of the ignorant master is not the simple expedient of allowing the poor who have neither time, nor money, nor knowledge, to educate their children. It is the crucial experiment that liberates the pure powers of reason wherever science does not lend a hand. What one ignorant person can perform once, all ignorant people can always perform, because there is no hierarchy in ignorance. What ignorant people and learned people can both do can be called the power of the intelligent being as such. This power of equality is at once one of duality and one of community. There is no intelligence where there is aggregation, the binding of one mind to another. There is intelligence where each person acts, tells what he is doing, and gives the means of verifying the reality of his action. The thing in common, placed between two minds, is the gauge of that equality, and this in two ways. A material thing is first of all the only bridge of communication between two minds. 14. The bridge is a passage, but it is also distance maintained. The materiality of the book keeps two minds at an equal distance, whereas explication is the annihilation of one mind by another. But the thing is also an always available source of material verification. The ignorant examiner's art is to bring the examinee back to the material objects, to a thing that he can verify with his senses. 15. The examinee is always beholden to a verification in the open book, in the materiality of each word, the curve of each sign. The thing, the book, prevents cheating by both the ignorant and the learned. This is why the ignorant master can from time to time extend his competence to the point of verifying, not the child's knowledge, but the attention he gives to what he is doing and saying. In this way you can even be of service to one of your neighbors who finds himself, because of circumstances beyond his control, forced to send his son to school. If the neighbor asks you to verify the young student's knowledge, you need not hesitate to perform this inquiry, even though you have had no schooling. Page 33. What are you learning, my little friend? You will ask the child. Greek. What? Aesop. What? The fables. Which ones do you know? The first one. Where is the first word? There it is. Give me your book. Tell me the fourth word. Write it. What you have written doesn't look like the fourth word in the book. Neighbor, the child doesn't know what he says he knows. This is proof that he wasn't paying attention while studying or while displaying what he says he knows. Advise him to study. I will return and tell you if he is learning the Greek that I myself don't know, that I don't even know how to read. 16. This is the way that the ignorant master can instruct the learned one as well as the ignorant one, by verifying that he is always searching. Whoever looks always finds. He doesn't necessarily find what he was looking for, and even less what he was supposed to find. But he finds something new to relate to the thing that he already knows. What is essential is the continuous vigilance, the attention that never subsides without irrationality setting in something that the learned one, like the ignorant one, excels at. The master is he who keeps the researcher on his own route, the one that he alone is following and keeps following. To each his own. Still, to verify this kind of research, one must know what seeking or researching means. And this is the heart of the method. To emancipate someone else, one must be emancipated oneself. One must know oneself to be a voyager of the mind, similar to all other voyagers, an intellectual subject participating in the power common to intellectual beings. How does one accede to this self-knowledge? A peasant, an artisan, father of a family, will be intellectually emancipated if he thinks about what he is and what he does in the social order. 17. This assertion will seem simple, and even simplistic, to whoever ignores the weight of philosophy's old commandment, from the mouth of Plato, on the artisan's destiny, page 34. Don't do anything other than your own affair, which is not in any way thinking, but simply making that thing that exhausts the definition of your being. If you are a shoemaker, make shoes and make children who will do the same. The Delphic oracle was not speaking to you when it said, know yourself. And even if the playful divinity had fun mixing a little gold into your child's soul, it is the golden race, the guardians of the city, who will take on the task of raising him to be one of theirs. The age of progress undoubtedly wanted to shake the rigidity from the old commandment. Along with the encyclopedists, this age understands that nothing is done by routine anymore, not even artisans' work. And it knows that there is no social actor, no matter how insignificant, who is not at the same time a thinking being. Citizen Desta Tracy recalled this at the dawning of the new century. Every speaking man has ideas of ideology, grammar, logic, and eloquence. Every man who acts has principles of private morals and social morals. Every being who merely vegetates has his notions of physics and arithmetic, and simply because he lives with those like himself, he has his little collection of historical facts and his way of evaluating them. 18. It is thus impossible for shoemakers just to make shoes, that they not also be, in their manner, grammarians, moralists, or physicists. And this is the first problem. As long as peasants and artisans form moral, mathematical, or physical notions based on their environmental routine or their chance encounters, the reasoned march of progress will be doubly at risk, slowed down by men of routine and superstition, or disrupted by the haste of violent men. Therefore, a minimum of instruction, drawn from the principles of reason, science, and the general interest, is necessary to put sane notions into heads that would otherwise form faulty ones. And it goes without saying that the enterprise will be all the more profitable if it removes the son of a peasant or artisan from the natural milieu that produces those false ideas. But this evidence immediately runs up against a contradiction. The child who must be removed from his routine and from superstition must nevertheless be returned to his activity and his condition. Page 35. And since its dawning, the age of progress has been alert to the mortal danger of separating the child of the people from the condition to which he is destined and from the ideas that hold fast in that condition. Thus the age turns back and forth within this contradiction, that all the sciences are now known to be founded on simple principles available to all the minds who want to make use of them, provided they follow the right method. But the same nature that opens up a career in science to all minds wants a social order where the classes are separated and where individuals conform to the social state that is their destiny. The solution to this contradiction is found in the ordered balance of instruction and moral education, the dividing up of the roles that fall to the schoolmaster and to the father of the family. Using the light of instruction, the first chases away the false ideas the child receives from his parental milieu, the second, by moral education, chases away the extravagant aspirations the schoolchild would like to extract from his young science and take back to his life condition. The father, incapable of drawing on his own experience to further his child's intellectual instruction, is, on the other hand, all-powerful in teaching him, by word and example, the virtue of remaining in his condition. The family is at once the nucleus of intellectual incapacity and the principle of ethical objectivity. This double character translates into a double limitation on the artisan's self-consciousness. The consciousness of what he does is drawn from a science that is not his own, the consciousness of what he is leads him back to doing nothing other than his own task. Let us say it more simply, the harmonious balance of instruction and moral education is that of a double stultification. Emancipation is precisely the opposite of this. It is each man becoming conscious of his nature as an intellectual subject. It is the Cartesian formula of equality read backwards. Descartes said, "Think, therefore I am," and this noble thought of the great philosopher is one of the principles of universal teaching. Page 36. We turn his thought around and say, "I am a man, Therefore I think. 19. The reversal equates man with cogito. Thought is not an attribute of the thinking substance, it is an attribute of humanity. To transform know yourself into the principle of emancipation of any human being, it is necessary to activate, against the Platonic interdiction, one of the fantastic etymologies of the credulous, man, the anthropos, is the being who examines what he sees, who knows himself in so reflecting on his act. 20. The whole practice of universal teaching is summed up in the question, what do you think about it? Its whole power lies in the consciousness of emancipation that it realizes in the master and gives birth to in the student. The father could emancipate his son if he begins by knowing himself, that is to say, by examining the intellectual acts of which he is the subject, by noticing the manner in which he uses, in these acts, his power as a thinking being. The consciousness of emancipation is above all the inventory of the ignorant one's intellectual capabilities. He knows his language. He also knows how to use it to protest against his state or to interrogate those who know, or who believe they know, more than he knows. He knows his trade, his tools, and their uses, he would be able to perfect them if need be. He must begin to reflect on his abilities and on the manner in which he acquired them. Let's take the exact measure of that reflection. It is not about opposing manual knowledge, the knowledge of the people, the intelligence of the tool and of the worker, to the science of schools or the rhetoric of the elite. It is not about asking who built seven-gated Thebes as a way to vindicate the place of constructors and makers in the social order. On the contrary, it is about recognizing that there are not two levels of intelligence, that any human work of art is the practice of the same intellectual potential. In all cases, it is a question of observing, comparing, and combining, of making and noticing how one has done it. Page 37. What is possible is reflection, that return to oneself that is not pure contemplation but rather an unconditional attention to one's intellectual acts, to the route they follow and to the possibility of always moving forward by bringing to bear the same intelligence on the conquest of new territories. He who makes a distinction between the manual work of the worker or the common man and clouds of rhetoric remains stultified. The fabrication of clouds is a human work of art that demands as much neither more nor less labor and intellectual attention as the fabrication of shoes or locks. The academician L'Herminier expounded on the intellectual incapacity of the people. L'Herminier was a stultified person. But a stultified person is neither lazy nor a fool. And we ourselves would be stultified if we didn't recognize in his theses the same art, the same intelligence, the same labor as those acts that transform wood, stone, or leather. It is only by recognizing L'Herminier's labor that we can recognize the intelligence manifested in the most humble of works. The poor village people who live outside of Grenoble work at making gloves, they are paid 30 cents a dozen. Since they became emancipated, they work hard at looking at, studying, and understanding a well-made glove. They will understand the meaning of all the sentences, all the words of the glove. They will end up speaking as well as the city women who earn 7 francs a dozen. One has only to learn a language spoken with scissors, needle, and thread. It is merely a question, in human societies, of understanding and speaking a language. 21. The material ideality of language refutes any opposition between the golden race and the iron race, any hierarchy, even an inverted one, between men devoted to manual work and men destined to the exercise of thought. Any work of language is understood and executed the same way. It is for this reason that the ignorant one can, as soon as he knows himself, verify his son's research in the book he doesn't know how to read. He doesn't know the materials he is working with, but if his son tells him how he goes to work at it, he will recognize if his son is doing research, because he knows what seeking, researching, is. Page 38. He has only one thing to ask his son, to move words and sentences back and forth, as he himself moves his tools back and forth when he is seeking. The book Telemaque or any other placed between two minds sums up the ideal community inscribed in the materiality of things. The book is the equality of intelligence. This is why the same philosophical commandment prescribed that the artisan do nothing but his own affair and condemned the democracy of the book. The Platonic philosopher King favored the living word to the dead letter of the book, that thought become material at the disposition of men of substance, that discourse at once silent and too loquacious, wandering at random among those whose only business is thinking. The explicative privilege is only the small change of that interdiction. And the privilege that the Jacoto method gave to the book, to the manipulation of signs, to mnemotechnics, was the exact reversal of the hierarchy of minds that was designated in Plato by the Critique of Writing. Point 22. The book seals the new relation between two ignorant people who recognize each other from that point on as intelligent beings. And this new relation undoes the stultifying relation of intellectual instruction and moral education. Intervening in lieu of the disciplinary demands of education is the decision to emancipate that renders the father or mother capable of taking the ignorant schoolmaster's place, that place where the unconditional exigency of the will is incarnated. Unconditional exigency. The emancipatory father is not a simple good-natured pedagogue, he is an intractable master. The emancipatory commandment knows no compromises. It absolutely commands of a subject what it supposes it is capable of commanding of itself. The son will verify in the book the equality of intelligence in the same way that the father or mother will verify the radical nature of his research. The family unit is then no longer the place of a return that brings the artisan back to the consciousness of his incapacity. It is one of a new consciousness, of an overtaking of the self that extends each person's own affair to the point where it is part and parcel of the common reason enjoyed by all. Page 39. The Blind Man and His Dog. For it is indeed this that is verified, the principle of the equality of all speaking beings. By compelling his son's will, the father in a poor family verifies that his son has the same intelligence as he, that he seeks in the same way, and what the son, in turn, looks for in the book is the intelligence of the book's author, in order to verify that it proceeds in the same way as his own. That reciprocity is the heart of the emancipatory method, the principle of a new philosophy that the founder, by joining together two Greek words, baptized painkastic, asterisk, because it looks for the totality of human intelligence in each intellectual manifestation. No doubt the landowner who sent his gardener to be trained at Louvain for the benefit of his own son's instruction didn't understand this very well. There are no particular pedagogical performances to expect from an emancipated gardener or from the ignorant master in general. Essentially, what an emancipated person can do is be an emancipator, to give, not the key to knowledge, but the consciousness of what an intelligence can do when it considers itself equal to any other and considers any other equal to itself. Emancipation is the consciousness of that equality, of that reciprocity that alone permits intelligence to be realized by verification. What stultifies the common people is not the lack of instruction, but the belief in the inferiority of their intelligence. And what stultifies the inferiors stultifies the superiors at the same time. For the only verified intelligence is the one that speaks to a fellow man capable of verifying the equality of their intelligence. The superior mind condemns itself to never being understood by inferiors. He can only assure himself of his intelligence by disqualifying those who could show him their recognition of it. Page 40. Consider the scholar who knows that feminine minds are inferior to masculine minds. He spends the essential part of his life conversing with someone who cannot understand him. What intimacy! What sweetness in the conversations of love! In the couple! In the family! He who is speaking is never sure of being understood. He has a mind and a heart, a great mind, a sensitive heart. But the corpse to which the social chain has attached him, alas! 23. Will the admiration of his students and of the exterior world console him for this domestic disgrace? What worth is an inferior mind's judgment of a superior mind? Tell a poet, I was very happy with your latest book. He will respond, pinching his lips, you give me much honor, that is to say, my dear fellow, I cannot be flattered by the commendation of so small an intelligence as yours. 24. But the belief in intellectual inequality and in the superiority of one's own intelligence does not belong to scholars and distinguished poets alone. Its force comes from the fact that it embraces the entire population under the guise of humility. I can't, The ignorant one you are encouraging to teach himself declares, I am only a worker. Listen carefully to everything there is in that syllogism. First of all, I can't means I don't want to, why would I make the effort? Which also means, I undoubtedly could, for I am intelligent. But I am a worker, people like me can't, my neighbor can't. And what use would it be for me, since I have to deal with imbeciles? So goes the belief in inequality. There is no superior mind that doesn't find an even more superior one to be lower to, no inferior mind that doesn't find a more inferior one to hold in contempt. The professorial gown of Louvain counts little in Paris. And the Parisian artisan knows how inferior provincial artisans are to him, these, in turn, know how backward peasants are. The day when those peasants think that they know things themselves, and that the Parisian professorial gown drapes a lame brain, the loop will be closed. The universal superiority of inferiors will unite with the universal inferiority of superiors to create a world where no intelligence could recognize another as its equal. Page 41. For reason is lost where one person speaks to another who is unable to reply to him. There is no more beautiful spectacle, none more instructive, than the spectacle of a man speaking. But the listener must reserve the right to think about what he has just heard, and the speaker must engage with him in this. The listener must thus verify if the speaker is actually within the bounds of reason, if he departs from it, if he returns to it. Without that authorized verification, necessitated by the very equality of intelligence, I see nothing in a conversation but a discourse between a blind man and his dog. 25. The apology of the blind man speaking to his dog is the world of unequal intelligence's response to the fable of the blind leading the blind. We can see that it is a question of philosophy and humanity, not of recipes for children's pedagogy. Universal teaching is above all the universal verification of the similarity of what all the emancipated can do, all those who have decided to think of themselves as people just like everyone else. Everything is in everything. Everything is in everything. The power of the tautology is that of equality, the power that searches for the finger of intelligence in every human work. This is the meaning of the exercise that astounded Baptiste Froissart, a progressive man and director of a school in Grenoble, who accompanied the two sons of the deputy Casimir Perier to Louvain. A member of the Society of Teaching Methods, Baptiste Froissart had already heard of universal teaching, and in Miss Marcellise's class, he recognized the exercises that the Society's president, Jean de Lasteyrie, had described. He there saw young girls write compositions in 15 minutes, some on the topic of the last man, others on the exile's return, creating, as the founder assured him, pieces of literature that did not spoil the beauty of the most beautiful pages of our best authors. It was an assertion that learned visitors had greeted with the deepest reservations. Page 42. But Jacoto had found a way to convince them, since they evidently considered themselves to be among the best writers of their time. They had only to submit themselves to the same test and give the students the possibility of comparing. De Lasteyrie, who had lived through 1793, had lent himself willingly to the exercise. This had not been the case with Guignot, an envoy from the École Normale in Paris who, though he was unable to see any significance in Calypso, had managed to see the unforgivable lack of a circumflex on Croitre in one of the compositions. Invited to the test, he arrived an hour late and was told to come back the next day. But that afternoon he caught the mail carriage for Paris, carrying in his baggage as damning evidence the shameful eye deprived of a circumflex. After reading the compositions, Baptiste Froissart sat in on classes of improvisation. This was an essential exercise in universal teaching, to learn to speak on any subject, off the cuff, with a beginning, a development, and an ending. Learning to improvise was first of all learning to overcome oneself, to overcome the pride that disguises itself as humility as an excuse for one's incapacity to speak in front of others, that is to say, one's refusal to submit oneself to their judgment. And after that it was learning to begin and to end, to make a totality, to close up language in a circle. Thus two students improvised with assurance on the topic of the atheist's death, After which, to dissipate such sad thoughts, Jack-Otto asked another student to improvise on the flight of a fly. Hilarity erupted in the classroom, but Jack-Otto was clear, this was not about laughing, it was about speaking. And the young student spoke for 8.5 minutes on this airy subject, saying charming things and making graceful, freshly imaginative connections. Baptiste Froissart had also participated in a music lesson. Jack-Otto had asked him for fragments of French poetry, on which the students improvised melodies with accompaniments that they interpreted in a delightful manner. Baptiste Froissart came back to Miss Marcellise several more times, assigning compositions himself on morals and metaphysics, all were performed with an admirable facility and talent. Page 43. But the following exercise surprised him the most. One day, Jack-Otto addressed the students, "Young ladies, you know that in every human work there is art, in a steam engine as in a dress, in a work of literature as in a shoe. Well, you will now write me a composition on art in general, connecting your words, your expressions, your thoughts, to such and such passages from the assigned authors in a way that lets you justify or verify everything." 26 various books were brought to Baptiste Froissart, and he himself indicated to one student a passage from Atelier, to another a grammar chapter, to others a passage from Bossuet, chapters on geography, on division in Lacroix's arithmetic, and so on. He did not have to wait long for the results of this strange exercise on such barely comparable things. After a half-hour, a new astonishment came over him when he heard the quality of the compositions just written beneath his nose, and the improvised commentaries that justified them. He particularly admired an explication of art done on the passage from Atelier, along with a justification or verification, which was comparable, in his opinion, to the most brilliant literary lesson he had ever heard. That day, more than ever, Baptiste Froissart understood in what sense one can say that everything is in everything. He already knew that Jack-Otto was an astonishing pedagogue and he could guess at the quality of the students formed under his direction. But he returned home having understood one more thing: Miss Marcellise's students in Louvain had the same intelligence as the glove makers in Grenoble, and even this was more difficult to admit as the glove makers on the outskirts of Grenoble